Adriana, a young wife and mother, lived a life far removed from faith. Despite her husband's quiet devotion and her daughter Blanca's innocent belief, Adriana mocked the idea of God, never imagining that life would take a tragic turn that would test everything she thought she knew. When a horrifying accident leaves Blanca gravely injured, Adriana's world shatters. Desperate and broken, she finally reaches out in prayer, searching for the hope she had always denied. A miraculous recovery soon follows, and Adriana's heart begins to change. She learns that faith, love, and respect for others can heal even the deepest wounds. This is a powerful story of transformation, faith, and the enduring strength of family. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Adriana, a young wife and mother, seemed to take every chance she could to scorn the divine, making light of faith and questioning those who believed. But the day came when the cost of her irreverence became more than she could bear. Adriana, her husband Julian, and their precious daughter Blanca lived in a small, unassuming house on the outskirts of town. Their neighborhood was simple but filled with hardworking families who, despite their struggles, lived with dignity. Adriana was known for being a quiet, stern woman, pouring her energy into her work and the endless demands of maintaining her home. Meanwhile, Julian was a man of integrity, full of warmth and love, particularly when it came to little Blanca. He toiled tirelessly, always with the dream of giving his family the best life possible. His patience was a quiet testament to his deep, unwavering love, which showed in every tender glance and kind gesture he extended toward his wife and daughter. Blanca, their 6-year-old beacon of light, was the heart and soul of their modest home. Her infectious laughter filled the rooms, her boundless energy a source of endless joy. With her wild imagination and unwavering determination, she transformed ordinary days into extraordinary adventures, breathing life into the mundane. Julian worked long hours at a nearby supermarket, his days filled with routine tasks that could easily wear down a lesser man. Yet, he approached his duties with a quiet determination, carefully arranging products on shelves and ensuring everything was in its rightful place. Though the work was repetitive, Julian found purpose in it, knowing that each hour spent at the store was a step toward building a better future for his beloved family. Adriana, on the other hand, ran a small flower shop where she found a strange sort of peace among the plants. Despite her reserved nature, tending to the flowers brought her a rare sense of satisfaction. Working alongside her was Dona Beatriz, an older woman whose years of experience in the business were matched only by her deep and unwavering faith. Beatriz was devoted to her beliefs in a way that deeply irritated Adriana. Every morning, without fail, Beatriz would kneel at the shop's entrance, whispering prayers of gratitude for her work and pleading for the strength to carry on. And every afternoon, she would do the same, thanking God for getting her through another day. Adriana couldn't stand it. She found herself mocking Beatriz at every opportunity, throwing sharp jokes that belittled the older woman's devotion. Adriana questioned Beatriz's faith with thinly veiled sarcasm, delighting in making the older woman uncomfortable. One day, the heat was nearly unbearable, the sun blazing down on the streets as if determined to roast everything in its path. When Adriana arrived at the shop, beads of sweat already forming on her brow, she saw Beatriz kneeling in prayer as usual. The oppressive heat only heightened Adriana's irritation. She let out a frustrated sigh, her exasperation evident as she stepped into the shop, her mind filled with a storm of impatience and disdain, oblivious to the storm that was yet to come into her own life. "Why do you even bother praying?" Adriana questioned, her voice sharp with irritation. She couldn't hide her annoyance as she watched Dona Beatriz kneeling at the doorway, lost in quiet prayer. The older woman lifted her gaze, meeting Adriana's eyes with a calmness that seemed untouched by the harshness of the world. "I thank God for the chance to work another day," Beatriz replied softly, her words carrying a peace that baffled Adriana. Adriana scoffed, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Thanking him for what? This sweltering heat makes it feel like we're working in hell itself." She let out a bitter laugh, expecting Beatriz to share in her mockery. But the older woman's serene expression remained unchanged. "The circumstances don't matter," Beatrice answered quietly, her voice steady and unwavering. "I pray because I know God sees everything. He is the one who gives us the strength to endure, even on days like these when it feels unbearable." Adriana turned away, her irritation deepening. She began roughly arranging the flowers, her mind filled with disdain for her employee's unshakable faith. "Let's see how strong that faith of hers is," she muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she devised a cruel plan. "Let's see her thanking God after I send her out into this inferno to water the plants." After lunch, Adriana wasted no time. With a sharpness that bordered on cruelty, she called out, "Beatrice, go water the plants outside, and don't talk all day about it either. We don't have time for your usual dawdling." Her voice dripped with contempt, disregarding Beatrice's age and the oppressive heat outside. Adriana watched with a twisted sense of satisfaction as the older woman obediently nodded, picked up the watering can, and stepped out into the blazing sun without a word of protest. Beatrice moved with the same calm determination that characterized everything she did. The sun bore down relentlessly, but she approached the plants with the same care she always gave to her work, her movements unhurried, her dedication unwavering. But Adriana wasn't satisfied. The harshness of her order hadn't been enough to break the older woman's spirit, so she followed her outside, her steps quick and deliberate. Standing under the scorching sun, Adriana let out a mocking laugh. "Aren't you thanking your Lord now, Beatrice? Where's your God in all this heat?" Beatrice paused, looking up from her task, her face calm as ever despite the sweat dripping down her brow. "I'm fine, Mrs. Adriana," she replied with gentle conviction. "I'm just doing what you asked. And yes, I already thanked God before I started because He sees everything. He knows that I'm doing my best, even now." The sun blazed overhead, an unforgiving force, but the true battle raged between the two women. Adriana, relentless in her cruelty, and Beatrice, steadfast in her faith. No amount of heat or harsh words could shake Beatrice's resilience. Her patience and serenity were unyielding, like an oasis in the desert, proof that her strength was rooted in something far deeper than anything Adriana could comprehend. At the end of the long, exhausting day, Adriana stumbled through the door, her body weighed down by the relentless heat and her mind clouded with frustration. She dropped her purse on the table with a thud, letting out a weary sigh. "I can't stand it anymore," she exclaimed, her voice filled with pent-up irritation. Dona Beatriz and her constant praying at work. It's unbearable. She refuses to stop, and it's completely disrespectful. Julian looked up from the book he had been quietly reading, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Adriana's agitation. His eyes met hers as he asked, "And what exactly did you do?" "I told her to cut it out, to stop with all the praying," Adriana replied, the frustration seeping into every word. "But she just keeps going. I'm fed up with it all. God doesn't exist, Julian. All this praying and thanking, it's pointless." She let out a bitter laugh, the weariness and anger coiling tightly inside her. Julian, however, didn't mirror her frustration. Instead, he responded with a steady resolve, his voice firm but gentle. "God does exist, Adriana. Can't you see? Look at everything we have, everything He's given us." Adriana's eyes flashed with anger, her patience worn thin by the day. "What has He done for us?" she retorted, her voice rising. "I'm the one who works tirelessly, day in and day out. If He's so capable, then tell Him to show up and do the work for you." She let out another sarcastic laugh, but this time it was laced with bitterness rather than humor. Julian remained composed, undeterred by her anger. "He's given us everything, Adriana," he said softly but with conviction. "Just look around. Look at our home, at our little Blanquita. Can't you see His blessings all around us?" But Adriana, feeling the sting of frustration rather than the comfort of his words, shook her head. The conversation was only adding fuel to the fire raging inside her, and she could feel it burning hotter with each passing moment. Deciding she'd had enough, she let the argument slip away, unwilling to continue down a path that only seemed to lead to more frustration. As the tense conversation lingered in the air, their daughter Blanca, with her sweet innocence, approached her mother. Her wide eyes were full of hope as she softly asked, "Mommy, can I come with you to work tomorrow?" Adriana's heart softened instantly, her frustration momentarily melting away at the sight of her daughter's eager face. With a loving smile that was worlds apart from the anger she had just shown, she knelt to Blanca's level and gently explained, "No, my love, you can't come with me tomorrow. But how about on Saturday morning? Would you like to come with me then?" Blanca's little face lit up with a smile as she nodded, her sweet expression full of understanding far beyond her years. "Yes, Mommy, Saturday is fine," she said, wrapping her small arms around her mother in a hug that seemed to wash away the heaviness of the day, if only for a moment. Later that evening, Adriana called her family to the dinner table, hoping for a peaceful end to a turbulent day. As they began eating, little Blanca's eyes sparkled with excitement, and she couldn't contain her enthusiasm any longer. "I know what I want to be when I grow up," she announced, her radiant smile lighting up the room. Julian, his curiosity piqued, leaned in and asked gently, "What do you want to be, my love?" With a beaming smile, Blanca declared, "I want to be a veterinarian. I want to heal all the animals, and God will help me do it." Instead of sharing in her daughter's joy, Adriana felt a surge of anger rise within her. Her face hardened as she abruptly stood up from the table, her voice trembling with frustration. "There it is again, another one who believes in God. How can this be, my daughter?" she exclaimed, her disbelief turning into a harsh rebuke. "God doesn't exist, Blanca. You need to rely on yourself, work hard, and leave aside these silly religious beliefs." But before the tension could escalate further, Julian intervened, his tone firm yet calm. "Yes, my daughter, God does exist, and don't worry, He will help you." Blanca, caught in the crossfire of her parents' conflicting beliefs, looked from one to the other, her young mind struggling to make sense of the argument. "But Mommy, I want to help animals," she said, her voice soft and filled with innocence. "You can help animals, sweetheart," Adriana insisted, trying to steer her daughter away from faith. "But you don't need God to do it. You just need to study hard and work even harder. That's all it takes." Seeing the confusion and distress building in Blanca's eyes, Julian gently placed his hand over his daughter's and spoke with soothing reassurance. "Everyone has their way of understanding the world, my love. The most important thing is that you follow your dreams and act with kindness, no matter what you believe." Blanca, still clutching her dream tightly, looked up at her father with a determined gaze. "I want to be a veterinarian to help animals feel better," she said with quiet resolve, her earlier joy dimmed but not extinguished. The rest of the meal continued in a tense silence, the warmth of the family dinner overshadowed by the undercurrent of discord. Each of them retreated into their thoughts, the conversation earlier still echoing in their minds. Blanca's determination remained strong, but the division over faith and the influence of the divine hung heavily over the table, leaving a lingering unease in its wake. On Friday night, little Blanca's eyes lit up with excitement as she remembered her mother's promise. She eagerly asked, "Mommy, can I go with you to work tomorrow?" Adriana, though worn out from the week, couldn't help but smile at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Yes, you can come with me," she replied. "But you must behave and pay close attention to everything." Blanca's heart leaped with joy at the thought of spending the day at her mother's shop, convinced that this would be a grand adventure. Adriana, on the other hand, hoped that the experience would teach Blanca the value of hard work and dedication. Bursting with anticipation, Blanca went to bed early, her mind filled with dreams of the day ahead. When morning finally came, she was up and ready, her energy boundless. Together, mother and daughter set off for the flower shop. The moment they arrived, Blanca rushed inside, her face glowing with excitement as she took in the vibrant colors and intoxicating scents of the flowers. Every little detail fascinated her. Each bloom seemed like a new wonder waiting to be discovered. Meanwhile, Adriana spotted Dona Beatriz, once again deep in prayer at the front of the shop. Adriana couldn't resist making a snide comment. "Praying again? You're going to need it today," she said with a sarcastic laugh. But as usual, Beatriz responded with calm grace, her voice steady. "Praying helps me, Mrs. Adriana. It gives me strength and guidance for whatever challenges come my way." While this exchange unfolded, Blanca continued to dart around the shop, her delight only growing as she explored the space. She inhaled the sweet fragrance of the flowers and twirled between the rows of plants. But when Adriana noticed her daughter's behavior, her patience wore thin. "Blanca, stop running," she shouted abruptly. Her mother's sudden outburst startled Blanca, and in that moment of surprise, the little girl lost her footing. She slipped on a small puddle of water left behind after the plants had been watered. Before anyone could react, Blanca stumbled and fell with alarming force, crashing into the large glass window of the shop. The glass shattered instantly, breaking into 1,000 sharp fragments that scattered through the air with a deafening crash. The sound echoed down the street, catching the attention of passersby who rushed to help. Chaos ensued as people hurried to the scene, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But Adriana's world narrowed down to one singular focus. Blanca, her precious daughter, now lying motionless amidst the broken glass. Panic seized Adriana's heart as she saw the blood on her daughter's arms and legs, cuts from the jagged shards that had rained down on her. Her pulse raced, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Blanca!" she screamed, her voice thick with desperation, but there was no response. Adriana's knees gave way beneath her, and she collapsed beside her daughter, trembling as waves of guilt and fear crashed over her. Tears began streaming down Adriana's face uncontrollably as she hovered over Blanca, her hands trembling as she tried to assess the damage. In that agonizing moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. The world around her became a blur. The concerned murmurs of the crowd and the sound of broken glass crunching underfoot all faded into the background. All that mattered was Blanca, lying so still, and the silent prayer that began to form on Adriana's lips despite herself. "Please, God, let her be okay." Desperation clawed at her, threatening to consume her as she waited for help to arrive, unable to do anything but hope against hope that her little girl would open her eyes. The weight of her earlier words, her dismissal of faith, pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone, as she realized that in this moment of sheer terror, all she could do was pray. At that crucial moment, Dona Beatriz wasted no time. With calm determination, she pulled out her mobile phone and swiftly dialed for an ambulance. Her voice was steady yet urgent as she described the situation to the operator. Once the call was made, she turned her focus to finding something to help. Grabbing clean clothes from the back of the shop, she rushed back to where Adriana knelt beside her daughter, still clutching Blanca's tiny hand, her face a mixture of tenderness and overwhelming despair. The minutes stretched on, each one filled with a profound sense of helplessness as they awaited the ambulance, the air thick with tension and fear. Amid the suffocating silence, Dona Beatriz did the only thing she knew to do in such moments. She prayed. Her whispers floated through the stillness, seeking comfort and strength amid the unfolding tragedy. But to Adriana, the seconds felt like hours, each one more torturous than the last. She couldn't bear to wait any longer. Fueled by a fierce, desperate love, Adriana decided to drive her daughter to the hospital herself, unwilling to waste another moment. Just as she turned to leave, her eyes landed on Dona Beatriz, still deep in prayer. Something inside Adriana snapped. Her grief and fear, boiling over, erupted into anger. "Beatriz, your God doesn't exist," she screamed, her voice raw with fury and pain. "If he did, he wouldn't have let this happen to my daughter. You're fired. I don't ever want to see you here again." Without another word, Adriana scooped Blanca into her arms and dashed to her car, her heart pounding with a single, desperate mission: get to the hospital as quickly as possible. She drove like a woman possessed, the world outside a blur as she fought back the tears streaming down her face. Every second felt like a lifetime until, at last, she reached the hospital. She burst through the doors, her voice shaking with panic as she cried out, "Please, someone help me. My daughter isn't responding." A doctor and nurse immediately sprang into action, their faces filled with concern as they rushed towards her. They gently but swiftly took Blanca from her arms and whisked her away to the emergency room, leaving Adriana standing there, heart heavy with fear. She tried to follow them, her footsteps frantic, but the nurse stopped her with a gentle hand. "Ma'am," she said softly yet firmly, "we need you to wait outside while we do everything we can for your daughter." The words hit Adriana like a wave. She stood frozen for a moment, watching helplessly as the doors closed behind them, separating her from her little girl. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed into a nearby chair, the weight of her anguish pressing down on her chest like a crushing force. Her mind raced, replaying the horrific scene over and over, each time more unbearable than the last. With trembling hands, Adriana pulled out her phone. Her fingers fumbled as she quickly dialed her husband's number. When he answered, the sound of his familiar voice broke the last fragile thread of her composure. She tried to speak, but the sobs overtook her, and all she could do was cry into the phone, the words lost in the overwhelming tide of her fear and sorrow. "Julian, please, come to the hospital now. Blanca had a terrible accident. She's barely breathing," Adriana managed to say through her sobs, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. On the other end of the line, Julian's heart stopped. "What are you saying, Adriana? What happened?" Panic surged in his chest as he frantically grabbed his keys. "I'm on my way now," he exclaimed, abruptly ending the call. Without wasting a second, he bolted out the door, the knot in his stomach tightening with every step. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity, his mind racing with thoughts of his daughter, his worst fears looming in the back of his mind. When he finally arrived, Julian spotted Adriana in the waiting area, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her whole body trembling with fear. He rushed to her, and as soon as she saw him, she collapsed into his arms. They held each other tightly, their shared terror unspoken but deeply felt. Julian gently stroked Adriana's hair, whispering whatever reassurances he could muster, even though his heart was filled with the same fear. All they could do was cling to each other as they waited for news about their little Blanca. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before a doctor finally approached them. His face was serious, his expression grim. He looked directly at them, his gaze heavy with the weight of the news he carried. "Are you Blanca's parents?" he asked, his voice calm but solemn. Both Adriana and Julian nodded, their hands gripping each other tightly, too afraid to speak. The doctor motioned for them to sit down, his tone becoming even more serious. "I need to talk to you about your daughter's condition," he began. The impact Blanca suffered was severe. It caused her to go into cardiac arrest, which deprived her brain of oxygen for a significant period. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. "Do you believe in God? Because only a miracle could prevent her from suffering lasting damage, if she survives at all." Adriana and Julian's grip on each other tightened, as the tears they had fought so hard to hold back began to flow once again. The words felt like a punch to their hearts. They were a close-knit family, their lives centered around each other, and the thought of losing Blanca was too unbearable to even contemplate. It felt as if their world was collapsing around them, the weight of the doctor's words crushing their spirits. Anxiety, despair, and helplessness filled every corner of their hearts as they struggled to comprehend what they had just heard. The sterile hospital waiting room, with its cold, harsh lighting, seemed even more unfriendly in their anguish. It felt like time had stopped, each second dragging out into an eternity of suffering. Adriana's sobs echoed in the room, her grief overwhelming. And then, through the haze of their sorrow, a soft voice broke through. A woman who had been watching from a distance approached them quietly, her steps gentle and respectful. She looked at Adriana with compassion in her eyes, and in a voice that was both tender and empathetic, she offered, "In times like these, praying is the best thing you can do." Adriana, still trembling, looked up at the woman, her heart torn between anger and desperation. The mention of prayer stirred something deep inside her, a turmoil of emotions she couldn't yet unravel. What can be done? God always listens to desperate prayers. The woman offered softly, her words filled with genuine concern. But instead of bringing Adriana comfort, the mention of God only deepened her pain. Trembling with anguish, she responded with a voice that quivered between sorrow and anger. If God existed, He wouldn't have let my daughter be in this danger. Please, just be quiet. The woman, recognizing the depth of Adriana's suffering, silently stepped back. Her eyes were filled with understanding and empathy, knowing that sometimes even the most well-meaning words can wound more deeply than they heal. With a respectful nod, she quietly withdrew, leaving Adriana alone with her pain. Adriana, visibly shaken, felt suffocated by the weight of the hospital walls closing in around her. Her mind was a whirlwind of chaotic thoughts, and the sterile, oppressive atmosphere of the waiting room had become unbearable. She needed to escape, to breathe, to find a moment of stillness amid the storm raging within her. Julian, sensing his wife's growing distress, gently wrapped his arms around her, kissing her cheek softly. He didn't need words to understand her need for space. "Go get some fresh air," he whispered, his voice both tender and reassuring. "I'll call you right away if there's any news about Blanca." Adriana nodded, grateful for his quiet support, and slowly made her way out of the hospital. As she stepped outside, the warm air hit her face, but it offered little comfort. She walked aimlessly, her feet carrying her away from the hospital, but her heart remained tethered to the small room where her daughter lay fighting for her life. Every step seemed to pull her further into the abyss of her grief, and no matter how far she walked, she found no escape from the torment gnawing at her soul. Eventually, her legs, weak and trembling from both exhaustion and despair, brought her to a small park. She stopped in front of an empty bench, its presence offering the only semblance of relief in an otherwise merciless world. With nowhere else to go, Adriana collapsed onto the bench, her body giving in to the overwhelming weight of her emotions. She buried her face in her hands, and the tears she had been holding back for so long finally broke free. Her sobs echoed in the quiet park, a raw and unfiltered expression of the agony that refused to let her go. There, on that lonely bench, Adriana felt the full weight of her fear and hopelessness crash down upon her. The air was warm, but she felt cold inside, as though her very soul had been plunged into darkness. She cried until she had no more tears left to shed, her heartache reverberating in the stillness around her, each sob a plea for relief from the unrelenting torment she could not escape. In the solitude of that moment, Adriana felt as if the world had forgotten her, and the silence was her only companion, amplifying the pain she could no longer hold back. The doctor's somber words echoed relentlessly in Adriana's mind, intensifying her torment. Each tear she shed was a reflection of her overwhelming love for her daughter, mingled with the fear of losing her. She sat on that park bench, lost in a sea of sorrow, clinging to the fragile hope that somewhere, somehow, a miracle might save Blanca. As she sat there, eyes swollen from crying, a mysterious man approached quietly. He sat down on the bench beside her, his presence so subtle that it didn't immediately draw her attention. A few moments passed in silence before he spoke, his voice carrying an inexplicable calm that cut through the fog of her grief. "It's complicated, isn't it?" he said softly, his tone both gentle and knowing. "Every suffering brings a lesson. We often find ourselves asking why. Why must we endure such pain? Why do these trials come into our lives?" Adriana, startled by his sudden presence, turned toward him with a confused expression. She didn't recognize him, and his words left her both puzzled and intrigued. "Excuse me," she said cautiously, "but do I know you?" The man smiled, a mysterious warmth in his eyes. "I don't believe so. You've never sought me out, though you should have. But you're often too busy." His response only deepened her confusion. There was something strange about him, something both unsettling and oddly familiar. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. The man's smile grew, but it remained enigmatic. I am nobody, yet I can be everything. I am simply an observer, a traveler on life's many roads. Despite the unbearable grief she was feeling, Adriana found herself strangely comforted by his presence. There was an inexplicable peace that seemed to radiate from him, a calmness that softened the sharp edges of her despair. As bewildered as she was by this man's sudden appearance, she couldn't deny that sitting beside him made her feel different, as though a small weight had been lifted from her chest. What unnerved her the most was the odd familiarity about him. Though she was certain she had never seen him before, there was something about his presence that stirred a memory deep within her. A memory she couldn't quite place, as if their paths had crossed in another life, another time. The duality of feeling both close to and distant from him unsettled her. The man continued, his voice steady and soothing. We often forget to search deep within ourselves for the answers we need. God is always there, waiting with open arms. No matter how far we think we've strayed, He is always ready to forgive, to embrace those who seek Him with a sincere heart. Adriana listened intently, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a flicker of hope ignited in her heart. She whispered, almost to herself, "Do you think there's still hope for me and my daughter?" The man nodded, his warm smile never wavering. "There is always hope, Adriana. It's never too late to open your heart to God's peace and forgiveness. He understands your pain, and He's ready to help you carry your burden. You just need to seek Him and trust in His unconditional love." Adriana sat there, torn between disbelief and desperation. Her heart was a battleground of emotions. On one side, the skepticism she had clung to for so long, and on the other, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this mysterious man was right. With a mixture of cynicism and longing, she muttered, "If he's capable of saving my daughter, I'd even believe in Santa Claus." The man simply smiled again, his expression one of quiet understanding. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince her. Instead, he let the silence settle between them as if giving her space to process everything she was feeling. His presence remained calm, patient, and reassuring, as though he had all the time in the world to wait for her heart to find its way. The man, with that same unshakable calmness, gently suggested to Adriana, "Offer a sincere prayer. I promise you, it will be heard." Adriana, though still skeptical, found something in his voice that moved her. But just then, the roar of a motorcycle passing by caught her attention for a brief moment. When she turned back to look at the mysterious man, he was gone, vanished, as if he had never been there at all. Astonished, Adriana scanned the park, searching for any sign of him, but there was none. It was as though he had simply disappeared into thin air. Overcome with a mix of emotions, despair, confusion, and a strange sense of peace, Adriana closed her eyes. She allowed herself to surrender to the moment, letting her pain, her hopes, and her fears spill out in a raw and desperate prayer. "I don't know if you exist," she whispered, her voice trembling, "or if you can even hear me, but I know that I need you. My daughter needs you. Please save my little girl. She doesn't deserve this. If you are real, if you can hear me, I beg you to save her. And if I have ever done anything to offend you, please forgive me." Tears streamed down Adriana's face as she poured her heart out, feeling a strange sense of release in finally voicing everything she had kept buried inside. She continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "My life has never been easy. I was abandoned as a child, and I grew up alone. No one ever told me about you. I never found comfort in faith, not when I needed it most. But now, I just want my daughter to be saved. Please, I beg you." Just as the last word left her lips, Adriana's phone rang, startling her. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out of her pocket, and she froze when she saw Julian's name on the screen. With a deep breath and a lump in her throat, she answered the call. "Honey, come quickly. Blanca has woken up." Julian's voice was filled with disbelief and joy, and those were the only words she needed to hear. Without hesitation, Adriana jumped to her feet and ran. She ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding, her mind racing with hope. That small, fragile spark of faith that had just been ignited inside her suddenly flared to life. When she arrived at the hospital, she burst through the main doors, her breath ragged but her spirit soaring. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for Julian, and when she finally saw him, she ran straight into his arms. They embraced tightly, their hearts overflowing with relief, joy, and gratitude. Neither of them spoke, but the bond between them had never felt stronger. Together, they walked toward Blanca's room, each step filled with hope that their nightmare had finally ended. As they neared the door, Adriana's mind replayed everything that had happened. Her encounter with the mysterious man, her desperate prayer, Julian's call. None of it made sense, not in the logical way she was used to. But at that moment, she didn't care about logic or reason. All that mattered was that her daughter had been given another chance. And with that realization, the spark of faith within her began to burn even brighter. Before they could enter Blanca's room, the doctor stopped them in the hallway, his expression one of disbelief and awe. "Did you pray?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "Because what happened today, it's nothing short of a miracle. I have no medical explanation for how your daughter recovered." Every sign pointed to no hope, and yet, suddenly, she woke up as if nothing had happened. Tears streamed down Adriana's face as she looked at Julian. She nodded, unable to find the words. They had both prayed, each in their way, in a moment of utter desperation. And now, here they were, standing in the light of what could only be described as a miracle. As they entered Blanca's room, they saw her lying there, her eyes open and filled with the same innocence and curiosity that had always defined her. The sight of her, alive and well, was enough to bring them both to their knees. At that moment, Adriana realized that something had shifted within her. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't need them. What mattered was that she had found hope, faith, and the courage to believe again. Adriana knelt beside Blanca's hospital bed, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she clasped her hands together, offering a heartfelt prayer. "Thank you, God, for hearing my pleas," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "From this moment on, we will place our faith in you. I trust that there is a purpose behind everything we've been through." Blanca's recovery defied all expectations. Day by day, she grew stronger, her energy slowly returning. The doctors, baffled by her swift progress, had no explanation for it. But for Adriana and Julian, there was no doubt in their hearts. It was a miracle. The faith that had been rekindled within them became their guiding light, and they knew they had been blessed with a second chance. One afternoon, as Blanca rested in bed, still a bit weak but steadily recovering, she looked at her parents with wide, curious eyes. Her expression was tender, almost otherworldly, as she made an effort to sit up a little. In a soft voice, she whispered, "Mom, Dad, when I fell, I saw God. He spoke to me and said that everything would be fine." Adriana and Julian exchanged stunned glances, their hearts pounding as they hung on every word their daughter spoke. "He told me not to be afraid," Blanca continued, her voice gentle and reassuring. "He said everything would be okay and that I would see you again." Her words filled the room with a sense of peace and hope, like a beacon of light after a long night. Adriana moved closer, wrapping her arms around Blanca in a gentle embrace, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Julian, holding his daughter's small hand, could barely contain his emotions. His voice was choked with tears as he softly confirmed, "Yes, my dear. It was he who saved you and brought you back to us." Blanca continued to recover well, and by the next morning, she was ready to be discharged from the hospital. The family returned home together, their hearts filled with a newfound sense of faith and connection, knowing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. As they sat down for breakfast, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, Blanca looked at her mother with a mixture of curiosity and eagerness. "Mom, do you have to go to work today?" she asked, her voice sweet but tinged with anxiety. Adriana, setting her cup down on the table, smiled warmly at her daughter. She knew how much it meant to Blanca to have her by her side after everything they had endured. "No, my love," Adriana replied, her voice calm and full of affection. "Today, I don't have to go to work. I'm staying home with you." She paused for a moment, then added with a gentle tone, "But I do need to make a very important call." Blanca's face lit up with happiness, and she relaxed, knowing her mother would be close by. As Adriana stood up and walked to the phone, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few short days. She was no longer the same woman who had scorned faith and turned away from belief. Now, she was someone who had witnessed the power of love, prayer, and miracles. With newfound purpose, Adriana dialed the number, ready to face whatever came next. She knew that as long as she had faith, and as long as her family was together, they could overcome anything. Adriana dialed Dona Beatrice's number with a mix of nervousness and determination. She knew she had to correct the mistakes of her past and express the gratitude that now filled her heart. When Dona Beatrice answered, Adriana took a deep breath and spoke with sincerity, her voice full of emotion. "Dona Beatrice, this is Adriana. I'm calling to sincerely apologize for how I treated you. I've realized how wrong I was, and I want you to know that Blanca has miraculously recovered. I believe your prayers had everything to do with it." On the other end of the line, Dona Beatrice sighed with relief, her voice warm with affection. "Adriana, you don't need to apologize. From the moment I heard about the accident, I've been praying for Blanca and for you as well. I'm so happy to hear that she's okay. God always listens to our prayers." Adriana felt a lump form in her throat, but her heart was light with gratitude. "Thank you, Beatrice. I'm also calling to ask if you would consider coming back to work with me. I was wrong to doubt your faith, and I'll never make fun of it again. I'm truly sorry, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Dona Beatrice smiled, tears of joy filling her eyes as she responded warmly, "Of course, Adriana, I'll gladly come back to work with you. I accept your apology, and I'm just so thankful that everything turned out well. I'll continue to pray for you and your family, always." The next morning, Adriana arrived at work with a renewed sense of humility and appreciation. As she approached the shop, she saw Dona Beatrice kneeling at the entrance, lost in prayer as she had always done. But this time, when Beatrice noticed Adriana approaching, she hurried to stand, worried that her prayers might still be unwelcome. To her surprise, Adriana gently placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. In a gesture that was both grateful and remorseful, Adriana knelt beside her, bowing her head in prayer. Together, they offered their gratitude to God, their prayers intertwining like the newfound bond between them. For Adriana, this moment was a profound acknowledgement of the change in her heart and a recognition of the strength that faith and prayer had brought to her life. The rest of the workday passed in a joyful atmosphere, with laughter filling the shop and a renewed sense of camaraderie between the two women. Adriana had learned an invaluable lesson about respect, faith, and the power of belief. Every morning from that day forward, Adriana and Dona Beatrice would pray together before starting their day, their shared prayers strengthening both their working relationship and their friendship. As the sun set and they prepared to go home, Adriana reflected on everything that had happened. She realized that faith, even if it had once seemed foreign to her, had become a powerful source of strength and comfort during her most challenging moments. She also understood that respecting others' beliefs could create bonds where there had once been division. Silently, she thanked God for the second chance she had been given and promised herself that she would never again underestimate the power of prayer and faith. As we reflect on Adriana's journey, we see how faith, humility, and respect can transform lives in ways we never imagined. Now, we want to hear from you. What have you learned from this story? Take a moment to comment below and share one thing that has touched your heart and that you plan to bring into practice in your own life. Whether it's embracing faith, respecting others' beliefs, or simply opening your heart to the power of change, your insights matter. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue to share stories that inspire and connect us all. Thank you for being here with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.